Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Outlier Detected, a podcast by the Data Science Institute Student Council at Columbia University, exclusively dedicated to individuals with stories in data science that stand out beyond the normal. I'm Cassie, a member of the council and a recent graduate from DSI at Columbia University, and I'm very excited to be hosting today's episode with my friend Rahul.
Hi everyone, I'm Rahul Agarwal. I am also a member of the Data Science Institute Student Council and a graduate student at the DSI. In our previous episode, A Unicorn in Data Science, we hosted Aishwarya Srinivasan and learned more about her journey in data science, LinkedIn, and about the women in data science community. In this episode, we are switching gears and trying to gain some insight on the recent trends in art and artificial intelligence from a very special guest.
One thing we data scientists know is that data science field is huge and that its possible applications are unimaginable. Our today's guest is an outlier herself. She applies AI on historical art, curates art exhibitions, and completed her PhD at the Department of Art and Archaeology at Princeton University. She's currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the Data Science Institute and is leading a major cross-field research initiative in art and AI. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Emily L. Spratt.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful and warm invitation. I immediately said yes to this request for the podcast because of the title of your series, Outlier Detected. And I identified with that immediately. I feel like I've been an outlier most of my life. And I think that some of the most interesting researchers have often been sort of on the outskirts of convention and tradition and exploring things in a new way. So thank you for the invitation. And I'm just delighted to be a part of any series that would call itself Outlier Detected.
Wow, that sounds so amazing, and thank you so much for appreciating that. I would also like to mention that we are very excited to have you here on our podcast, and we know that you are a multifaceted person, right? You are an art historian, data scientist, strategic advisor, and a lot of things you have roles you have played through your lifetime. So, what would you mind sharing a little more about your background, how you came about these fields, and what led to one another?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, it was the way that I approach my life, which is through a very curious sort of lens toward the world. And it was sort of the curiosity about what are the interesting questions to be posing about the world and what are my experiences in the world sort of bringing to me that makes me want to understand it better. So it's really been through this sort of spirit of curiosity that I've come to the career that I have today. I actually started off in the hotel school at Cornell University as an undergraduate and quickly realized that that was not the right place for me, largely because at that time, the hotel industry wasn't focused on sustainability and the environment, which has been something that's been a very passionate subject for me. And I consider myself an environmentalist since always. And so I left the hotel school and really pursued radically different things, first environmental things, but ultimately came back to academia and was interested in psychology, religious studies, classics, medieval history, art history, and really was very fortunate to be able to pursue my interest in all of those areas as an undergraduate. And it was my ability to really get a feeling for each of these different and diverse fields within the humanities that I believe gave me the very strong foundation for what I would come to do in my graduate and professional work. And so I decided on the field of art history because it's very much a montage discipline. And in that respect, it has a lot of comparisons, a lot of similarities that one could make with data science, which is all about bringing different fields from statistics and math and the social sciences together in unexpected and new ways. Art history is like that too, because it considers what are the implications of the way that we see the world, the visual world. How do we interpret images, and how do we interpret the history of art, and what goes into the making of a concept of a history of art. So I pursued my graduate studies in art history, and ultimately it then came to the issues, the problems that I was having with organizing data related to my dissertation project that got me asking questions. Again, here's that spirit of curiosity at work, thinking about how could I better answer these things for my primary research and what would be the most effective tools to use for my dissertation. And so my dissertation was on the legacy of Byzantium in the early modern period, and it hasn't really been recognized as an independent field of study within art history. And so it required me doing tons of primary research in the field, notably in Greece, but also throughout the entire Mediterranean world. And then lots of visits as well to collections throughout Europe in particular. And I collected more images than I can even, I mean, I have so many hard drives of data of my photographs. It's a little bit daunting. How do I even personally store them in a physical space? But anyway, it was this primary research taking photographs of objects that often were not published and were in very unique, very special places, often in churches, in ecclesiastical collections. And it was a big question. What do I do with this image, which has a sacred association? And there are also great sensitivities about the rights of this image and how it could be used. And I was forced to get permission from not only the priest of a church, but maybe also ecclesiastics within the community and the Ministry of Culture. And there's a big question of what are the ethical implications of using a sacred image in one's work. And I'm very lucky that I got to think about these questions at an early point in my research discovery process for my dissertation, because it brought me in tune with some of the most fundamental questions about the ethics of image use in our society today, because you're not going to find more challenging to use from the point of view of the legality of it or what is then culturally appropriate than with sacred images. Sacred images immediately, by definition, make one consider what are the ethical implications of taking a photograph of it, having this digital copy, and then what am I going to do with this digital copy? So it forces one to think about all of the questions about data ethics of images before one even starts to think about using statistical methods for how it is that you're examining this corpus of then larger images in terms of these groups, these curated depositories of images that one is making. And so I really recognized early on that before AI became so popular in the media, I realized early on that machine learning was going to change everything about the way that people were approaching the image, and that the implications of this on the archive of images that I made would be a great way to sort of look through the larger ethical issues related to data science that were at the time really in its infancy, but developing very quickly. And ultimately, it was the philosophical issues that came out of the discovery process that I went through in terms of finding out what tools are actually available right now for me as an art historian coming from the humanities to use with this. What can I actually put to use for my dissertation? Well, it turns out that there weren't that many things available for use at that time, but everything has already been built that would allow us to do these things if the right players came together. And so I became very interested in how is it that I can then work as a diplomat between very diverse communities of people with the shared objective and mission of thinking about the future of archives of images in a radically different way, but one which takes an ethics ethically conscious approach first and foremost, because of the nature of the sacred images that are really the bread and butter of my traditional research. And all of this then led to greater philosophical explorations of things. And at the end point of my dissertation research, I was related to other work that I was doing in computer vision science applications and art exhibitions of this material. I then was also the strategic advisor of an art market company related to blockchain technologies. And I actually pivoted the company into a blockchain-based technology company to increase trust and also transparency within the collecting process. And that also then very much shaped my approach to this very unique space within data science of art, creative technologies, archives, historic preservation, art history. It really brought it all together because for me, up until that point in time, the missing piece had really been the role of corporations in all of this. So I'm coming from, the hardcore humanities, from academia, but really it's big tech which is leading so many of the innovations in applications of computer vision technology and other AI applications. And I wanted to really be a part of the developments that were happening in that space because it's a very different approach than one finds in academia or within the nonprofit sector. And so I was very fortunate also with my work, my longstanding work with the Frick Collection and Art Reference Library here in New York City, to have really gotten the experience in academia, the museum and cultural heritage sector, and the art market, and to be in conversation with the big technology companies about how this space is being shaped, because it's all of these sectors that are having an influence on what's happening. But the problem is that they're really not talking to each other. And we need to facilitate pathways between these different groups in order to responsibly shape the future curation of our visual world with digital images as we continue to explore the possibilities of the online experience and all things digital.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. I mean, you are involved with blockchain, with facilitating and making things which are not existing and like crystallizing them out of existence. That is really amazing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think
Thank you.
it's a very interesting an important perspective to bring into data collection because as data scientists, we don't usually think about how these images that we're with were collected or like ended up on our hard drive. And I think it's really important to think about like all the ethical considerations that one needs to make when working with sensitive data like ecclesiastical data, like you said. But I just wanted to ask if you can give us a brief summary of what kind of research you're doing at DSI these days.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for the question. So my research has taken a turn to the more philosophical and legalistic implications of image use. And so I'm working on a number of papers related to that, some publications which have recently come out, which is exciting. But the probably maybe for the podcast, the most fun project that I've done has been the gastronomic algorithms, one which I know you've heard of. And I actually led a major collaboration with a very wonderful, very special restaurant in Paris called L'Arpège, which was really the first through the vision of Chef Alain Passard, the owner and the chef of the restaurant, through his vision of really farm to table, vegetarian, vegetable first cuisine. He was arguably the first person to really do that. He transformed the concept of haute cuisine in France, which is a difficult tradition to to change at all. And so he was a very early pioneer in this very interesting space, which also had a focus on sustainability and the environment and local gardening and the farm to table produce and the implications of the ecosystem for how the restaurant fits within larger food cycles. And I was fascinated by the focus that Chef Passard had on the visual qualities of the vegetables on his Michelin plates of food. This is a 3-star Michelin restaurant. It's considered, I think the last ranking had it at the 8th best in the world. So really, really beautifully plated dishes. And the first time that I dined there, I looked at these plates and I almost didn't want to eat them because it was like paintings on the plates. They were beautiful. They reminded me of Matisse cutouts. And my first question to the chef was obviously, are you also a visual artist? There's no way that these plates can be so stunning without you also being a visual artist. I know something's going on. And that was indeed the case. And Chef Passard is a visual artist working in the medium of collage and montage and working out the conception visually of how the vegetables will appear on a plate through his studio workshop practice of these collages. And so I thought, again, putting on the data science cap, well, if we have lots of plates, that the restaurant's making lots of plates every night, and if we have images of all these beautiful plates that look like paintings, and we have a record of the collages that the chef has made as a visual artist, what could we learn about the relationship between the two? The chef has said that his collages are influencing how his dishes are visually portrayed. But how can we use data science to explore that relationship further? And could we actually use a generative algorithm to think about whether a particular plate could in fact then using a particular GAN, could then we actually take a plate and then have the GAN produce what the cutout for the plate would have been? What would the collage be of the dish that's photographed, and vice versa? If you take a collage, then what would then the actual plate of this food look like? And so we did a bunch of experiments in this area, and they were all really interesting. But from the aesthetic point of view, from the artistic point of view, I thought that the images lack something. And the chef and I, both being great admirers of the Renaissance painter who was active in the court of Rudolph II, Giuseppe Arcimboldo, who's very famous for these wonderful fruit and vegetable portraits, even of the Emperor Rudolph II himself. We thought, could we do something like that with GANs, where we take the vegetables, vegetable portraits essentially, and use the archive of images from what we've been creating with these GANs to then create a modern portrait of a person with a Michelin plate styled face. And so we were thinking, okay, well, that would be really fun and that's kind of exciting, but there's a lot of ethical considerations to restructure someone's face with food. So how do we do that? We ended up using This Person Does Not Exist as our go-to data set, AI data set for faces. So we wouldn't have direct ethical problems scraping the net or something like that for portraits of people who might not consent to their face being turned into a Michelin plate of food. However exciting that does sound to me. So we created a data set with AI of portraits of people that did not exist. And then with the results of the GANs that we already had, of the combination of the examination of the collages and the initial dishes of food, their actual photographic appearance, we then actually made portraits in the style of Giuseppe Arcimboldo, but with the Michelin plates. And what was fascinating, we used CycleGAN as our program, and what was fascinating was that it was the verification images in the image translation process that were the most visually interesting ones. And we ended up focusing on those as a way to further sort of explore the creativity behind all of this. And so it wasn't just about the archive of the restaurant in terms of the plates that they serve, thinking about culinary history and thinking about what is a dish of food and how have the appearance of dishes of food changed over time. We were really excited about lending to the creation of an archive of what from the point of view of historic preservation is called intangible heritage, making that intangible heritage, because people don't usually save, the image of what they're eating, but to create an archive, which then begins to create a historical record for how we are eating plates at this particular restaurant at this particular place in time. But not only that, to use AI as a way to explore the creative process, because the notion of what constitutes French gastronomy, what really makes the culinary arts so special and even protected in some cases by UNESCO as the multi-course dining experience of France actually is protected by UNESCO. But how do we capture something about the creative process that goes into making a meal? And the radical possibilities that the gastronomic algorithm projects really allowed for shows, in my opinion, very much the French spirit to explore wildly from a visual perspective, at least, but also in terms of how ingredients are put together, and to not be necessarily limited in thinking about new conceptions for things, even though at the end of the day, no one's going to eat a portrait that is of a Michelin portrait of a person. No one wants to eat that because there's cannibalistic associations, of course. But the very fact that we could even think about that and do that was a part of a larger process of thinking about food and putting things together in different ways, which is one part of a very complex, larger history of the French creative kitchen, of which Chef Passard's work has historically been extremely emblematic of. And so that project's been really exciting, and we've gotten wonderful feedback so far. We exhibited the results in the Global Forum for AI and Humanity, and that was sponsored by President Emmanuel Macron. And we're excited about next steps related to the project, including showing the artworks publicly now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic to some degree, and also gifting the one of the artworks to the president, to President Macron himself. So that's exciting. And I have started working on a larger research project about the history of the prepared plate. And again, art history being broad in its conception of how we think about visuality and all the possibilities of an image and what it means to look at an image, interpret it, and its function historically and culturally. I'm really fascinated by the possibilities of using AI to examine Instagram, for instance. Now that people love to take photos of their food when they go out to dinner and post it on their Instagram, I would love to be able to examine all of those pictures and see how trends related to the way that people are interacting visually with their dish, how this really relates to our culture today, and what that says about our historical relationship with prepared food on a plate.
So I understand this project is taking a very visual approach to food presentation, how it relates with collages and art. Have you considered adding like another layer of depth in that and maybe analyzing flavors, smells, or like other attributes of food that are like equally important as presentation for a Michelin star restaurant?
Cassiani, that's a wonderful question. And there are so many exciting things happening with AI, in particular in the food sciences, related to the way we think about smell, the way that flavors are created, and the way that even the appearance of a dish could be an indication of its freshness or of the ingredients that are composed within it. Yes, there are lots of possibilities, and I am really interested in exploring those further. And I think that having a focus on the visuality of it and using computer vision as a way to really go in on this is interesting, and something that has not been historically a big part of food science, but something that I think could be a useful support to some of the most recent data science-based applications to that world, not just to food science, but to the agricultural sciences more broadly too.
Wow, that has just opened so many doors to the world of data science that I feel I personally was not really aware of. And that is the beauty of the podcast, right? When we interact with people like you who are in the field, working and creating new fields among itself, that is something that is very fascinating. So to actually understand for someone like a newbie like myself, what is your advice to someone who wants to explore this world of AI art and visualizations, and moreover uh, the aspects of working with computer vision and applying it to say the Instagram, all the Instagram profiles and different influencers and etc. What would you think they should start with, and what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that question. My advice would be to take courses in the humanities alongside the core courses for data science. And of course, my bias is that you would take classes, the art history survey course, which I think has tremendous value. But really, all the courses in the humanities offer so much in terms of giving a foundation for the way that problems are solved. It's about building your analytical and critical approach. And my critique is that this is largely missing, that the foundation of the way that projects are conceived really are generally not deep enough. And I think that if you've already chosen the data set, you're already using data science based techniques to look at the data and to make analyses of it. If you're already doing that, then to start asking the ethical questions at that point, it's almost too late. I mean, it's better than nothing, I suppose, but it's late in the process. And really, the critical positioning of data science projects has to happen at their conception. And so, while there's been a movement within the field, which I am glad to see, in pairing domain experts with data scientists, I think it goes even deeper than that. And I think that it's essential that a data science education also includes core competency within the humanities, basic training, because it's about the way you approach a problem. And so I know that probably you want me to answer something very specific. Oh, just do this one little thing and then you'll be all set. It's not that easy, and it really depends on your own personal path of discovery and curiosity for the world. But I would say that have one foot in the humanities too, because it will change fundamentally the way that you philosophically approach the problems that you're trying to solve in data science.
Sounds like we gotta learn from what we are teaching the models, right? We teach model to learn from the historical data, and if we ourselves are learning from our own history, then that would actually eventually be like us learning with the machine themselves, correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I entirely understand what you just said, but I would say that it's a constant discovery process, and you certainly can't omit the influence that you yourself have on that. But I think really, again, the emphasis should be placed at the project's conception and thinking about the philosophical implications of what you're doing. One of my biggest pet peeves, it's really more than a pet peeve, is that data scientists are likely to overly generalize what it is that their data and their analyses have done. And so the need to have a greater responsibility for the way a project is described in terms of what you have actually accomplished and what you say your results are purporting to represent, that it's at that place of understanding what data represents that these philosophical concerns become extremely clear. If you're saying, okay, we're using this data set and this data set means this one thing, you better be sure it really means that one thing. The bias is to generalize what the data means. And so one has to be really careful. And that's really why it's at the formation of these things that you really have to be particularly careful.
Yeah, that sounds like to the core problem which we are facing in today's world right now. Yeah.
I, um, from our conversation so far, I was just wondering if you could make it a bit more clear, like what is data science bringing to the table? Because you're really focusing on how one should know, like the history. They need to be very well immersed in humanities. Is data science bringing to the table something equivalent to manpower, just a computing power, or do you think it's bringing something? It's uncovering some underlying relationships that it would be very hard for a person to do, or it would require multiple people from different disciplines to combine together. What do you think is uh, what's the addition of applying data science to a field like art history?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I like sort of the different caveats that you brought out in it too. I would say that we now live in an age of information and data overload. And it's not really possible for one person to be able to comprehend all that's out there digitally. And it's because of this, and because we're increasingly reliant and interested in having a society which is based on this abundance of information, there's no question we need to have tools to be able to sort through it and to examine it. That doesn't mean that we can't, as humans, also understand the various phenomena that happen in our society and be able, through our own interactions with the world, sort of make assessments about it. But to be able to go through so much digital information, I think it's the issue of quantity that data science is able to address that can then really be an aid for any researcher or any person in our society, actually, because it allows you then to look at this multitude of information. But the way, of course, that is done is what really matters, and how that's approached is a very sensitive sort of equation. But I think that for art history, the potential for thinking about archives in new ways is really exciting. And I think that from the point of view of creative technologies, I think really interesting things are happening already that allow people to make images and work with images in ways that we never really thought were possible before. And I'm really excited about convergence and the way that tools, even ones that are very familiar and often used, just Adobe, are using so many different data related techniques and AI related techniques in different parts of it, that it's becoming seamless in the experience, that AI is already ubiquitous in society. It's already aiding decision-making processes. It's already influencing the way that we finalize a detail in a PowerPoint or keynote presentation. It's already helping us in ways that we might not even be directly aware of. And it's exciting how this is being built and how all of these different types of techniques are coming together. And actually, it's really in art and in media and in film that we see the exploitation of this convergence happening in radical new ways that I think are pushing the boundaries of how we think about even a concept of data science ethics. And so I think actually that this is the reason that it's the creative fields that have so much to offer in terms of the dialogue of the legality, the regulation and policy of how data is used and interpreted. The value add essentially of data science, which is the core of your question, I think that it's manifold. It depends, but the way it's all coming together without even necessarily our understanding at every interaction that we have with it, that's really the future of this space, convergence. And these things will continue to seamlessly influence how things are being made.
And do you think that, like down in the future, do you think that the job of an art historian could be replaced by a machine? Do you think that this is a fear that some people in the field have, or do you think that's definitely it's like a science fiction?
Well, there have definitely been sensational titles in the media claiming those things. I don't think an art historian will ever be replaced, but will certain jobs within graphic design or editing related things for images or for film, will jobs in that space maybe be lessened as a result of that? I think that's possible. I think probably many of my colleagues would say, no, it's not possible. But I already think that just the way that we're living in a society where people are particularly enthusiastic to be creative with images, to make images, to use their phone as an extension of their experience of the world and as a way to record their interactions with the world. And any tools that allow them to sort of curate that experience or to edit that experience to convey whatever it is they want to convey. I think the big tech companies know that and have been successful in creating tools, even anyone who has an iPhone, even the ability to get a sort of a mini photo documentary of your particular moments of a given year or with a certain friend group. That already is an example of technology companies recognizing that we're interested in individually being artists and giving us the power to easily take an experience we've had and turn it into a curated aesthetic experience. Okay, it's the aesthetic experience of Apple. It might not be yours. And they're working hard to give you options so that you feel like you personalize it. But it's not really, I mean, it's yours, but it's also really Apple's sort of idea of how your year should be curated through images. This is just one example. There are many other companies and many other platforms for negotiating this sort of like aesthetic experience of yourself and sharing it greatly with the world. So I think that as those technologies improve, and there's a lot of money being put into that because users of social media are eager to be able to share their experiences and their perspectives of the world visually in particular, that tons of research money has gone into how do we enhance this experience? That's also problematic. I mean, there's right now concerns over the possibility of an Instagram for kids. There are major ethical problems with that too. But in general, this space is moving quickly, and the automatic tools should not be dismissed. Will that take the jobs of some editors within the graphic design sort of system, or especially for images, moving images, film, all of that? Yeah, I do think so. But I'm a realist, so I think my colleagues would say definitely not. So an art historian, that's pretty unique, that the full experience of the philosophical approach to history and the history of art, that's something I don't think can be, maybe it could be simulated in a very superficial way, but it's not something that could really, in any organic sense or any true sense, could be replicated. But the editing stuff, that whole space is changing quickly.
Yeah, I agree. And I believe tools like data science, machine learning, deep learning are there to enable individuals explore different parts of life and take things a step further than replace them. So I also agree that some jobs that may be very easy to perform might go extinct, but I believe that once like a more creative part of you is working towards something that definitely cannot be replaced by a machine.
I mean, within art history, I mean, every art history department previously had a slide library. And now the slide libraries, I mean, where you had physical slides that were then put on a carousel. I mean, really, really, really archaic stuff compared to what we do in the world today. And pretty much all of these libraries are being dissolved, and there's no funding going to them. And even though they are interesting in their own right to preserve, actually, in terms of the history of the way that the discipline taught art history, but visual resources departments within art history, they've changed dramatically as a result of these changes. And the people who are in charge of organizing the physical slides, well, they don't have jobs anymore. So that's also proof that, exactly to your point of what's saying, that it's also influencing academia.
That is so true. I mean, you gotta change and you gotta adapt with the growing world to keep making a difference, right? But actually, coming back to a little earlier point, which where you mentioned that Apple in general, the aesthetics and the models which we built are, it is something that we are building, but it's very much biased by the Apple's decision and the Apple's perseverance to their technology than their tools. But as data scientists, we borrow a lot of models and code from the publicly available resources. I mean, we don't actually truly reinvent the wheel from the beginning, right? So how do you think we could remove the biases from our data sets, such biases, while we are trying to create something new, or how do we get started?
The concept of removing biases from the data set, right there, is somewhat problematic, because every data set is biased. Every person's perspective in this world is in itself biased because it's yours. So the idea of being able to remove all biases, that's never going to happen, because every data point that you're using is the reflection, is the outcome of multiple biases that went into its making in the first place. If we're talking about photographs, then it's the person who had the camera on that day and decided to take that picture of the thing because they were there, and why were they there, and why did they choose that moment. And then you have this image, and then what is it that's actually being represented in the image? If it's a picture of a person standing in a building, well, what person is that? What building is that? What is the significance of pairing those things together? And on and on and on. So everything about why it is that you have the data point, one point within the larger data set, and then what is actually represented in it, have more layers than one can really account for. And so to not recognize that at the point of building the data set is problematic. And to think that for a data science and Raul, this is no reflection on you, but this is really, your comment is very much in line with the normal approaches in data science, is that you could even have an unbiased data set. No such thing exists. Okay, no such thing exists. And so right there, that's the hubris of data science. And that's okay. That's okay. But we need to, that's okay that it's been like that, because, look, data science has built some really incredible things. But we need to build things in a new way now, because the implications of what's happening with the way that all of these tools are being exploited in good ways too, are so profound for our society. We no longer have the luxury to just say, okay, here we are, we're developing these things because we can, and let's just do it. Let's, the mantra from big tech, which is move fast and break things, that doesn't cut it anymore. And so I have been urging, and I've published on this too, that we need to really move away from a binary framework in data science. This is AI for good as opposed to AI for bad. This is, data which is biased, which is versus data which is unbiased. It's much more complex than that. And really, I see the future of data science as getting into that really important space between. And that is going to be the way that we're able to positively shape our future with the tools of data science.
I totally agree with you. Right? I mean, definitely we cannot remove the bias. But my question was more like, how can we handle that situation? Right? I agree with you totally that, you cannot have an unbiased data set. That is something like a myth that you will get a data set which is totally unbiased. But for example, if you actually have to choose the data which you are working with, right? If we as data scientists have the option of choosing what kind of data set to choose, we can probably merge multiple data sets and etc. But in terms of creating an art, how do you pick that training set? And if what if we pick the, I don't know, white people to represent the males, for example? In that case, that would be problematic. I mean, that is not just because of the data set, but also something that a person who is creating the model can control, right?
Yeah, all of the points that you raise are incredibly important, and I agree with you. I also, and I will just, maybe I can actually just add one thing to what you've listed there, is that there's also the use of AI generated data sets. And so an AI augmented data sets. And so this has actually been a space that I've been particularly interested in with images, is how are we using data sets that don't really have enough images in them? It's something where maybe there aren't enough of the thing to then use it to train algorithms on. So then how do researchers go about then augmenting the data set? And often this is done with AI techniques and with generative based algorithms. And so part of the project on the gastronomic algorithms was also an intentional interrogation of the concept of the augmented data set. Because the portraits by Giuseppe Arcimboldo, for instance, we have quite a few of them, more than was previously realized in the scholarship, but they're still are not enough to be able to do really good training for what is required for good machine learning related projects. And so we experimented with taking the existing portraits and rotating them with in complex ways. And I'm working on another collaboration project with doing radical experiments with geometry to basically change the way that an image is rotated in space and cut to enhance the data set, the number of images in the data set altogether. And there are limits to how much you can do with that. And I also really think that that shaping of the data becomes an interesting creative part of the artistic process. And with the gastronomic algorithms, I was really interested in looking into what that augmented data set would look like, and then curating those images. Usually when augmented data sets, when you need to augment a data set, you don't really look so carefully at the images that you're adding to it. And my project was all about looking really closely at all of the images we were adding to it and seeing how that would then further tweak then the GANs productions we were making. So we had, our data set was ultimately composed of GANs created images on top of GANs created images on top of GANs created images on top of GANs created images, and so on and so forth. There were so many layers, but at every step of the way, I was curating those augmented images that went into each data set.
Was the end result something that was human interpretable, or was it something completely abstract?
It was quite abstract, and I'm delighted that the article on the project just recently came out with Leonardo MIT Press. So look it up. You can see for yourself and make your own judgments. As a creator, I always am hesitant to offer too many interpretations of the images themselves. I think, because the reception really depends on the viewer. But yes, they were abstracted, but then they had these really interesting human qualities too, such as an eye emerging from a tomato carpaccio, or something, right, that looked like a nose coming out of your salad frisée. And so these were sort of terrifying, but I was really interested in using those images as a provocation, because our association with all of the experiences that we've had eating and with plated food is something that is very biologically hardwired within us. So when we as humans who eat, all the time, look at a plate of food, we look at that differently than we look at just something else in nature. We're really hardwired to understand if that's something that would be good to consume or something that might be harmful for us. There's an evolutionary imperative within that equation right there. And so when we see artwork that suddenly looks like maybe there's something alive in it, something even human in it, we feel a revulsion towards that. And so why is it that we feel so strongly repulsed by something like that? Well, it has to do with the relationship of vision to the other senses and to the larger sensory system. And so the idea, and this is a sort of a bias within computer vision science, there's an assumption that when you look at something, that it is possible to isolate the quality of vision as perception, that exists within a box. But our visual system works with the rest of our senses. And I'm really interested in the concept also of synesthesia and how the senses come together and work in concert. And so when you look at food, you remember the taste of something you had that looks similar to it. You remember the sound when you bite on it. You think about the smell of it. That triggers then your memories of your experiences with food. So I'm really interested in the way that vision works with the other sensory system, and that's something that I think a lot of interesting creative research is. Now there's some attention is being brought to that space.
Yeah, and maybe the next steps in data science would be to assist to help integrate the other senses into a visual image of like a plate of carpaccio, as you said. But I think we are running out of time a little bit, so we just wanted to ask a conclusionary question. So what are your next steps? Where are you going from data science and art history? What's the next direction that you're taking your research towards?
One really exciting project that I have underway, there are a number of them, has to do with bringing together icon collections and creating a platform for the automatic visual analysis of them as a way to hopefully gain insights into different artistic workshops. So that is a long-term initiative process that will have multiple institutional partners. Also, I'm involved with a large sustainability initiative that is coming out of ICOMOS, which is the governing scientific body for UNESCO, that's related to the Ngorongoro crater in East Africa. And we're looking at the way data allows us to engage in really exciting ways with the site as one of not only outstanding environmental value, but also really important cultural value too, as this is a space that the Maasai people inhabit and move through, and also engage with the really excitingly diverse group of animals that live there, herds of animals, and using satellite imagery to track the herds and also look at the degradation of the grasslands over time. So this is part of a larger initiative within UNESCO, ICOMOS, and I'm excited to be leading things with the Ngorongoro Crater Project. And we hope to bring attention to the way that data science can help us change the way we think about conservation and approach natural landscapes that also have outstanding cultural value. And I'm really excited about the focus that UNESCO has increasingly demonstrated interest in on looking at our environment as heritage in itself that we need to preserve. So thinking about how can we preserve these outstanding natural sites that there's no video and no augmented reality experience could ever replicate. But what can we do with data to bring attention to that and to paint a picture for policy and new regulatory recommendations for sites of outstanding environmental value over time? So I think there will be really exciting things to happen there. And then lastly, I'm working on my 2 book projects. So yeah, a lot underway, but the thing that's so wonderful about data science is that it really has the ability to cut through seemingly radically diverse fields. It really is the fiber of connection between them. And if we think of data science as a way to bring these otherwise disparate areas together, then I think that in itself offers a really interesting new theoretical and methodological approach to research. But in doing so, one has to be very conscientious of the philosophical implications of that as well.
Wow, that sounds incredibly fascinating, and it clearly spells out how much how hardworking you are and how much of how important your time is. So I would like to thank you again to join us today and share us your views and your work and be the guest on our podcast.
Thank you so much, Raul and Kassiani. It's really been a pleasure talking to you. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.